Let 'em Go Barefoot is a podcast that dives into all things parenting and education through the lens of mindful awareness. Conversations aim to bring forward patterns, beliefs, and attitudes that shape our expectations and ideas about what it means to raise healthy children. With a blend of science, ancient wisdom, and intuition, we will explore ways to support, nurture, and connect with our growing children while also nurturing and expanding ourselves. I am grateful you are here. Hi, everybody. Today I have Pam Laricchia on the podcast, and many of you may know Pam. She is in my mind, a rock star in the unschooling community and has been a mentor to me. She has written multiple books and has her own podcast and also has a mentoring or a community program, I should say. And maybe you can correct me on that, Pam, if it's more of a community that you've put
It
together where
is more
people
of a
can.
community, yeah.
Okay. And
Yeah.
so I asked Pam to come on today because I want to talk about her beautiful book, The Unschooling Journey, a field guide, and get the story behind it, where it came from, the ideas, and also to pull out some information that she shared in this book that resonated with me deeply, and I feel like will resonate with a lot of you. So welcome, Pam. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Missy. I'm really excited to talk with you. I just wanted to say, like, I guess as a bit of an introduction, yes, we came to unschooling back in 2002. I have three children. They are now all of adult age in their 20s. My eldest just turned 30. And it has been a fascinating journey for me. It really started back then when my eldest just didn't fit into the classroom particularly well, and yet at home I could see his enthusiasm and joy for learning. And it was that juxtaposition that was kind of at the heart of my questioning. That's what got it started. And it was actually a few years before I discovered the idea of homeschooling and then quickly unschooling. It was not back then a very well known thing in Canada where I live.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of the genesis of the journey. And when it comes to this book, The Unschooling Journey, what happened with that one is as I was writing my first two books, Free to Learn and Free to Live, I was also at that time writing regularly on my blog, and I was contemplating writing fiction, and I was exploring writing and storycraft more deeply. And when I was doing that, I came across discussions around The Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell
Mm-hmm.
and The Writer's Journey by Christopher Vogler. And as I read them, I was struck deeply by the connections to my experiences coming to unschooling. So much so that back in 2015, I was excited to write a series on my blog about my unschooling experiences through the lens of the hero's journey. So, stage by stage. And when I finally made my way through all of that, I discovered that didn't even quench my curiosity about it. I was thinking, because it was always on my mind. I was thinking, okay, I'll go through, I'll write about this, and that'll like get me through it to the other side. But what happened was, if anything, it fired up my curiosity about it. And then this book was basically the result of that.
Mm-hmm.
I really feel like it turned out to be such a journey, choosing unschooling, choosing this path, choosing to do the work that it asks of us, to question so many of our conventional beliefs that we've been handed, right, growing up, and just taking that time to see if they truly make sense to us. Do they make sense from my experiences in my life so far? What was my experience going to school? And then what's my experience as a parent? How do I see my kids unfolding? And that just helped me grow so much as a person. So, that's how this whole journey metaphor really resonated for me. And that's also what I love about calling it a field guide. It is very unique and individual to each person based on their experiences, based on who they are as a person, based on the person they want to be and become. So
Hmm.
that's really kind of the genesis of it all.
Yes. Well, and I'll elaborate a little too on the field guide side to say that within the book there are multiple pages that are blank with or with lines where you're able to take notes and write, and maybe people can even share their own story based on that previous chapter, as well as beautiful drawings. And if maybe to start sort of kind of to go through the book, we can discuss what the hero's journey is that Joseph Campbell wrote about, including like kind of what you did in the book is you put a comparison of what the hero's journey is and then what you saw it through the unschooling lens, which I found that so wonderful. And I love that the setup of that to give it that framework so that you can really kind of dig into the individual sections more and understand it from that perspective. So, for example, the hero's journey has like a main section of departure and separation, and then you directly connected it to choosing unschooling. And so that departure and separation would be departing and separating from conventional schooling. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, from conventional schooling and really from the conventional lifestyle that embraces them. Like school is
Mm-hmm.
so intimately intertwined with just being a child, right? With just life, the way it happens and unfolds in our conventional in our society, right? So this idea of contemplating something and moving towards something that is most definitely unconventional takes some thought, takes some consideration. And one of the things I love about that phase of the journey is the and he calls it refusal of the call in the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I that is totally it. Refusing the call
I think a
is
lot
what
of people
I
can relate
called
to
it.
that.
Yes, absolutely. And what I love to emphasize is there's nothing wrong with that. That can literally be part of the journey. It can be like, whoa, that is super, super different. I cannot imagine ever doing that. I'm going to take a step in the other direction for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
But then you may find, oh, something else comes up that reminds you, oh, yeah, there was this other way of doing things. And when you keep knocking against things, the idea can bubble up here. You may start to notice it over in another place that you didn't even think about. It may be a parenting thing that you're dealing with, it may be a learning thing. I mean, there are so many different ways that it can call to us, that call to unschooling that we can start with, that if it's going to become part of our journey, it will keep bubbling up for us. And eventually it's like, okay, I'll look at it a little bit more. I'll look at it a little
Mm-hmm.
bit more. And then when as it starts to make more and more sense, okay, I'll learn a little bit more. Like it's not what I find so fascinating, because choosing unschooling being the first phase of the journey, when we are deep in it, like, oh, I'm considering my kids not going to school, that can feel like that's the journey. That's the end.
Mm-hmm.
Once I choose unschooling, boom, I'm done. Here we are, we're doing it. Actually, no, that's kind of the beginning of the
Mm-hmm.
journey, right? It's like, okay, now we want to dive into it. And what are we going to learn about ourselves? What are we going to learn about the life that we want to live, the human being that we want to be? And how does that all weave together with our journey to embrace unschooling? So,
Yeah.
yeah, I love that part of it.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And then it's also, as we've talked about in past conversations, and I'm sure many people can relate to this as well, is once you pull that thread for one aspect of life and one particular system, then those other threads start being pulled as well because they're all connected. And so one thing you said in your book was that unschooling was that the lens that you looked at life through, which also meant you were going to look at parenting a little differently. So how did that kind of what did that look like for you?
Because yeah, when my kids first came home from school, they were all in school at the time. Um, at first, I thought I was just going to support them in a different way of learning. We were just going to learn at home instead of going to a
Mm-hmm.
classroom, right? But then, as I started learning more about learning, I started watching them in action. I started to see how valuable our relationship was in supporting their learning, right? In supporting the things that they were interested in not jumping in to teach them things, but to be with them and help them as they were exploring. Like, you really notice with any child that when you're teaching them something, maybe they do it in the moment, etc. But so often it doesn't stick because it's not where they are. We've tried to take them somewhere where we want them to be. It's not where their mind happens to be at the time. But if you
Mm.
give them the space and support them where they are, oh my gosh, the learning that we see happening. And it's learning that they remember, it's learning that they bring with them. It's learning that they bring up in conversations that we have. It's learning that connects to the next thing and the next thing. So when we give them that space and we start to see learning unfolding in front of us, we start to see how valuable our connection is with them, our relationship is with them, because, they're not going to come to us if we are always trying to redirect them, trying to tell them what we think they should be doing, etc. They're not going to come and share with us the exciting thing that happened while they were doing the thing that they love to do if they're
Mm-hmm.
worried that we're going to tell them to stop and do something else,
Right.
right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
that gets in the way of so much learning, doesn't it?
It does. And you mentioned that in your book too about moving from control to connection and how becoming an observer and being curious and excited for them and watching with your own beginner's mind. You mentioned beginner's mind, and I do want to dig into that a little bit because that's a um, something I learned about and got really really into when I was going through a mindfulness meditation retreat, and
Mm.
it is and I think it's a powerful little statement in that all of us can learn from, whether we're homeschooling, unschooling, or not, which is to look at the world with that beginner's mind again. If you're in a situation where you're hiking, what would it look like if you looked at this forest like the first time you ever saw a forest? How would you respond to your cat if you treated your cat as the first time you ever saw your cat? So this idea that we almost gloss over things that really are quite miraculous and amazing and wonderful because we get so used to them. So, looking at our children and their learning and their experience with that beginner's mind, and even if we have information that we could probably impart to them, even if we see them doing something that we've done a million times and we know the tricks and the way to do it a lot faster and maybe a hack, do we really need to give them that information? Because isn't that kind of why we got to where we got, because we were able to do it? And so it's like that, that beginner's mind. So can you talk to us a little bit about how that worked for you and your family?
Yeah. Oh, I love, love, love that so much because that was one of the big aha moments for me because I thought I was being helpful. They're
Hmm.
trying to do the thing and I know the tricks and I'm going to jump in and help them. And that can sometimes be valuable, as you said, but only when that's what they're interested in. Because at that point, if they're interested in doing it as fast as possible, or as efficiently as possible, that they want to know the tricks right now, like there's nothing wrong with that. And we can share that when they're open to receiving that, when that's where they are that they want, but giving them the space and understanding that they may be seeing that moment completely differently than we're seeing it. So that's the embracing beginner's mind, the recognition that other people are in the same moment with you and maybe seeing it completely differently,
Mm.
like, not factually, but the way that they're approaching the puzzle that they're trying to put together, or the toy that they're playing with, or the game that they're playing. Their mind may be figuring out and maybe totally engrossed in one particular aspect of it. And we come in and we're looking at it through a completely different lens and we pull them away from that. And we we kind of just stomp all over the opportunity that they were involved in what
Mm.
they were curious about in that moment. And, it's often hard for them and us, even in that situation, right? I mean, just put yourself in that situation. You're busily working away, and your partner or a friend comes up and says, "Hey, hey, no, like do it this way. This is the best
Mhm.
way," or whatever, right?
Yep.
Nobody likes that.
No, no.
Because we're trying to figure it out. This is so important to me that my mantra, the one that I have now been embracing for years, is open and curious, which
Mm.
is really just evokes beginner's mind for me. It reminds me that there are all sorts of different perspectives on what's happening in the moment, and also many different ways that this moment can move forward and unfold, not just the one path that I see it. So I
Mhm.
can be much more creative and curious about how things will happen. Doesn't mean I'm stepping back and just playing the observer role. I may be intimately involved in the moment, but I don't need to be directing it,
Right.
right?
Well, and it's such a beautiful process when we're able to witness it from that lens. And I don't know how
Hmm.
many times with my children they would do something and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I never thought about it that way." Or,
Yes.
and I was like, "Well, how did you get to that point? I didn't know you could do that." They just giggle and it's kind of like it's just so cute. And even today, my son is 20 years old and we were having a conversation about something and I quickly gave an answer. And then he goes, "Well, mom, you know, can we break that down a little bit?" And then the more we started talking about it, I was like, "Yeah, you're right. Like, why did I immediately say what I said? Why didn't I?" I was like, "Why do you have to be so practical?" He starts laughing because it's true. It's like sometimes we get in these, I already know because I'm already a certain age and therefore, and then if we're like you said, open and curious, that is such a that to me is so freeing if we can
Hmm.
return back to those thoughts, open and curious. Okay, new situation, new person, new idea, open and curious. You see your kid on the floor playing with something that you had no idea they had access to, or you didn't even know it was available. And you're kind of concerned because maybe there's markers involved and there's a white carpet or whatever the case. I mean, obviously, if there's something you're concerned about getting broken or hurt, it makes sense to have a conversation about that. But still, the idea of open and curious, well, where are they going with this particular material or this, game or activity? And do I need to interject or can I just sit back and watch? And, even when my kids were younger, I remember when my older son, well, and my daughter too, it was just, there were sometimes they were just like, shh, like we don't need interference, like
Yeah.
it's okay.
And
And I
to be able to
appreciated that.
take that, yeah, exactly. To take that not as a personal attack or a personal assault on you. No, this is about them. This is about the moment they're having, and they
Mhm.
are engrossed and they don't want to try to have to take in anything else around it. They want to keep going where they are. So, I mean, there's just so many beautiful ways to take what you were talking about. I mean, there's the giving them space and just taking that moment to check in. Do I really need to jump in? And then even if it's, markers near a white carpet, it doesn't have to be stop. It can be, oh, let's move that over here. So you try to help them move in a way that minimally interrupts their flow. Like, so it's so not about yes, no, right, wrong. Oh, I mean, and the book
Mhm.
dives into that as being one of the stages as well, right? But it's about respecting all of us as human beings, right? And double checking with myself, like especially earlier on in my journey, I would come upon those moments and I would just have that automatic reaction to like, oh nope, stop, can't do that, don't do that in the house, or that makes me uncomfortable,
Mhm.
whatever the thing is. But taking that moment to just think about it for a second, like again, back to open and curious, like
Mhm.
what am I envisioning? Are there other ways that this could unfold? Is that actually going to be what happens? What would be the worst if that happens? You know what I mean? So it's
Mhm.
just fascinating. And the other piece from what you said is how much bigger our worlds are, right? by just embracing other people's perspectives and hearing it's like, oh, let's think about that another way. You really jumped down that path, that
Mhm.
practical path, or that's and this can be personality wise too, but understanding that our children also have different personalities, different strengths, weaknesses, interests, passions, ways of learning, like all the things. They are fundamentally different people than we are. So embracing and supporting that doesn't diminish who we are, but it means we can live side by side together. One isn't better than the other, right? And our world is so much bigger. My world has been so much bigger when I fully bring my kids, their thoughts and perspectives, and them as people into the moment with me, rather than me knowing what's best for everyone and just trying to even politely get them to follow my path.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and in the section where you have leaving the ordinary world behind as part of the journey, and you discuss sort of the metaphor of the whale and how we get swallowed up by the whale, like what is our whale to help us kind of transition. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but you said that your whale was your home because when you made the decision to unschool or to homeschool, you felt like you just needed to be home for a while and kind of pull back and stay within the comforts of your home in order to spend time kind of getting to know each other and your situation, or just sort of live in that world for a while. Can you kind of explain to us what you mean by that with the whale and the symbology of that?
Yes. I love that stage so much. And I remember it like almost feeling energetically bowled over when I kind of made that connection, because I'm like, belly of the whale, and
Mhm.
all the stories, they seem very, I'm out on a big journey kind of deal. Yet, as I thought about my own experiences, when I connected that to those first months, maybe even closer to a year, I found we really, really did kind of cocoon for quite some time. And it was such a valuable part of the journey for all of us. So for my kids, it was, oh, finally, they don't have to, get up and go to school and get homework done and all those pieces. They finally got to choose what they could do with their days. So embracing the stuff that they would want to play all the
Mhm.
time, except, they couldn't. They could only, evenings after homework was done, and weekends were the only times they could dive into the things that they love to play and do. So, having the time and space to just be able to just soak in all that stuff was so helpful for them, because they were just kind of filling their cup with all the things that they felt they had been missing out on. And yeah, even at that age, they can definitely feel like they're missing out on all sorts of things.
Mm.
And then for me, that was, I mean, number one, I was with them, so I could start to see it in action and watch them. But I was also learning about homeschooling, learning about unschooling, having those questions, right? And just trying to figure it out. Like, okay, these ideas make a lot of sense to me. And the kind of life you guys are describing, the experienced unschoolers are sharing about and describing, that sounds really cool. But, how am I going to get there like today with my kids? And and then you've got like, I know, certainly for me, nobody in my life, in my circles, had ever even heard of homeschooling. They're like, what? Your kids aren't going to school? Like, isn't that illegal?
Oh
What
my gosh.
curriculum are you using? Like, all those questions. And when I am new and just learning, I cannot confidently answer those questions.
Mhm.
So, giving myself kind of that cocoon to not feel confronted and then take 2 or 3 days to process myself back to, no, no, this is the choice we want to make right now. We want to embrace this and see how it goes. That's really hard to do if I kept going out and meeting up with people and having comments like that. That felt so confronting to me. It was just so much more calm, and also I learned so much better when I kind of just cocooned myself in the ideas and with my kids. So it's the ideas and then starting to see them in action with my own children. There is just a couple stages before that, finding our guides. Because often it's like the Gandalf, the elderly wizard, but I really found at that time that my children were wonderful guides, because
Mm,
when you took them out of that framework, of that structure, of that pressure of schooling, and just let them embrace what they wanted to do, oh my gosh, the learning that you see happening, the joy, the fun. Like it's like, oh,
yeah.
that's what I'm walking towards. And then you start to say, oh, maybe I get to do that. Maybe I don't need to feel like it's some sort of failure on my part that I don't want to go out all the time and go to you know, these things that we're supposed to be doing. I thought we'd be going to the science center all the time, and we'd be going, to all the art gallery, like all the recreational places, the learning places. I thought that's what, okay, we're not going to school, so we'll be able to do all the things. But no, truly, what worked so much better for us was to get to know each other again, to
Mm.
hang out together, to do the things that we were really interested in doing and curious about. And I was super curious about unschooling, and they were having a lot of fun with their things too. And so just being okay with that and embracing it, and that shift to being open and curious about the things, like that all came together and really evoked that energy of the belly of the whale, where they're like, oh, I'm trying to refuse this thing, I don't want to do this journey that I'm being called upon to do. And then through that process of being in the whale, coming out and saying, okay, I've accepted this and I want to do this. And then really starting the next phase of the
The
journey
next,
from there.
yeah.
That yeah, that really did um sound very much like that season for us of cocooning,
Hmm.
before then we became more comfortable with being out and about.
Yes. Well, and there's several things you said that I want to highlight. One is that, you know, embracing the learning as the parents, that sometimes when we decide to do something different, that we have an image in our head or we envision it being a certain way. And like you said, we were going to trade going to school for busying ourselves with all these activities and adventures. And when that wasn't happening,
Yeah.
you're like, "Whoa, am I doing it wrong?" And so we start asking the questions again. So it's that idea of the learning is happening for everybody. It's not just about the kids. And then it's also letting go of the timeline that gets put on children so early with when in the school model, that you have to do this by a certain age and this by a certain age. And that can easily translate into the unschooling world where you're like, okay, there's a timeline. Remember, we had a timeline in the other on the other path. There should be a timeline on this one. And then we even question the timeline. So it's letting that part go and just remembering to look at your people, look where you are, don't worry about outside world, you're on your journey. It looks different for those people over there on their journey. And while it's sometimes fun to see what other people are doing because it can give us ideas, it can make us think about things a little differently. We might be able to go, oh, I didn't know about that part. It still needs to come back to you and your kids and who they are and who, like you said, who what do you want for your life. And that time, respecting that time for yourself and even allowing yourself that time is a critical piece of any transition, whether it's,
Oh,
you know, to
yeah.
going to school, coming home from school, taking a new job, moving into a new city. I just love that whole idea can be put on any transition that people come up against.
Absolutely. I love that so much. And I love that you brought up that timeline because, and I know I talked about it in the book too, we can, when we're first coming to unschooling, right? We've decided we're going to do this, we're going to nail this. So much of that school ethos is still with us, right? It's like, okay, I want an A in unschooling,
Yeah.
and I am going to get the checklist of what unschoolers do, and we're going to do that, and we're going to do it as fast as possible, because that is also another idea we've observed growing up, that speed means better. The
Mhm.
faster you do it, the better. And just tell me what I need to do, and I will do it. Oh my goodness, can send us off track so much, but it is so normal, right? That's part of the stuff we're going to start questioning, because it's just, we have just absorbed that so much growing up, right? It's like, tell me what to do, I will tick off those boxes, and I will do it as quickly as possible. And we're judging ourselves on how well we accomplish that, right?
Yeah.
But part of the journey is just questioning those pieces. How do they get in our way? Like the the ticky box thing, you really, it's, for me, that's the difference between intellectually understanding something and then knowing how it works in real life, right?
Mm.
It's to a point where you can like feel it in your bones, like I can say, okay, no rules, or unschoolers say you should always say yes to your kids. Like, these are all messages, and they all make sense, but they're just the soundbite. There is an
Mhm.
iceberg underneath of
Yeah.
understanding why that makes sense. And when you get to the point of understanding and that being a useful kind of mantra for you, you will also understand where it doesn't work. It's like, learn the rules so that you can break them kind of deal. Because you aren't going to always say yes. It doesn't make sense to always say yes. Yet it can absolutely be helpful to think, why not yes when something's coming up? Because we have so many of these constraints, just ingrained in us from growing up, that, we don't throw the ball in the house, or, the marker thing, whatever the constraints are that are just bringing up an automatic no to us, we can take that moment to think, why not? We can
Mhm.
take that moment to be open and curious to say, how else? Or, oh, this is just me not liking to do that thing. It doesn't mean my kid has to also not like doing that thing.
Yes, yes.
So it's amazing that way.
Well, and that's one thing you mentioned too, that the rules versus principles. And
Hmm.
I do find some of the people that I talk to, and I have seen it just in general, like online and social media, that there is a question that people have, especially those new to unschooling. Well, it seems like you guys don't have any rules. And it, like you said, it's wonder, it's a yes to everything, really? Like, and then, the side eye
Yeah.
or the frown, or and it is that. So, okay, let's talk about that. So, what is the difference between this idea with rules versus principles? And you gave some great examples in your book, and I will add one real quick before you elaborate a little bit more. When you were discussing the way we say no and how we kind of jump in, because we try to predict, I should say, we try to predict 3 steps ahead what's going to look like 3 steps ahead if they do that thing that we feel nervous about. And I have a wonderful memory of my son when he was younger, before he started drinking out of like a cup without a lid. He put his milk in a cup and without a lid, and he started walking into our living room where we have furniture and carpeting and all that stuff. And I remember holding my breath, and I was like, okay, because in my mind I saw milk on the floor, a sour smell in the furniture, cleaning for the next 45 minutes. And then I just said, Missy, just let it go. Let it go. If he spills it, look how excited he is. He is so proud of himself for pouring it and carrying it, and he's just going to go sit it on that little table. And so I didn't say anything, and he went to put the cup down, and it hit the edge of the table, and milk spilled out, but it spilled out only onto the glass tabletop. And so he turned around like, ah, and I was like, it's okay, we're good. So I said, how about I just run and grab some stuff and we'll clean it up. But before I did, this whole, like, it started bubbling up on the edge. So like the surface tension of the edge of the lip of the glass tabletop held the milk from falling completely off. And so we had this wonderful discussion about how the glass was made and the fact that it created this little edge, and instead of it pouring right off, it started dripping and dripping. And it was just, and I will never forget it because I remember thinking like how differently that could have gone if I would have just been like, oh my God, why are you spelling things? And or immediately shutting him down for trying something that he felt really sure of himself for. And again, it's a matter of, yeah, okay, kids are going to fumble, they're going to drop things, there's going to be messes, but isn't that what life is? It's a matter of trying and sometimes failing, quote unquote, or not getting it right the first time, or retooling and re-engaging. And if we constantly get in the way of our kids taking those steps and making those mistakes, and or having those moments where things don't go quite as they envision, it's just more information for them as much as it is for us.
Right? I mean, and I think that's to me that's back to the opening curious piece. Like how fascinating was it how that unfolded for you
Mm-hmm.
guys, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
there was so much learning in there. There was working together in there. You know, we can catastrophize things so easily in
Mm.
our minds, right? It's like, oh my gosh, look at that milk. Like you said, it's gonna, it's gonna end up somewhere where it's gonna soak in, it's gonna smell, it's gonna make a mess. Like all those kind of things just jump to our minds immediately. But it is so rare that that would happen. Like even because you chose to be there with
Mm-hmm.
them, right? And you saw that that happened. Like that's the piece. Yeah, sure. It could happen if I like, oh, okay, I'm going to close my eyes, let him do that because I always say yes. And I'm going to go over here and read my book, right? I mean, then there's a much better chance that might unfold. But when we are living together and we are with our kids and supporting them, and we're noticing that this is unfolding, and we're just kind of paying attention, and then you were there to have the conversation, to notice what was happening with the milk drops after it spilled, and to just engage with them like that was so much richer than spill or not spill.
Yeah.
And I'm going to close my eyes over here, right? It is
Yeah.
just so much richer. And the other piece about rules that I find super fascinating is that often, often people, when they first hear, what do you mean no rules? They'll bring up like, it's often safety rules, right?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's like, but I need to be able to tell my kid, don't run out in the road, or, don't do this, don't play balls in the house. I like all those pieces. And I think the thing that I find really fascinating is I don't literally need to have a rule. Because when I spout out that rule to my toddler, young child playing in the front yard, don't run on the road, I have just given them the responsibility for that. And do I really feel that they're capable of making that choice and of stopping themselves and of understanding why, like all those pieces? So, how much value is there in just spouting a rule? Whereas if I'm like, okay, my child's outside and I want to make sure that they don't run out on the road. And yeah, if something that they're playing with ends up on the road, I know my child, and they're just gonna be excited to go get the thing. They're not gonna notice that it's on the road, etc. So I can be there. I can, instead of handing them the responsibility, I can continue to keep that responsibility. And maybe I'm playing ball with them. So I'm the one that goes on the road, and I can narrate that as I do it. Oh, looking for the cars. Let me go get it. I'll go get it, bring it back so we can keep playing. Or maybe if they're enjoying playing on their own, I hang out between the child and the road, so that I can maybe
Mm-hmm.
catch or stop the toy or the ball or whatever. There are so many ways, because of course we don't want to create a situation where our child gets hit by a car, of course, but a rule of don't go on the road really is not the most effective way for that to happen. Like you're now telling your child that they need to take on that responsibility and figure it all out for themselves. And, it's just we as human beings like we want to have somewhere for the responsibility to lie. Somewhere, like if you didn't follow my rule, that's your fault. It's that blame we want to take because you know what? It's work to sit between the child and the road
Yeah.
or, to play with them, like all those things. But what kind of relationship do we want? What kind of parent do we want to be? What kind of person do we want to be? Because this is almost like age independent. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's about the individual, the person. There may be a wide range of ages in which our child becomes capable of noticing that and catching themselves before they would go out on the road, or knows how to look both ways and to safely use the road because we've been with them for however long that took to narrate that, to be an example of that, to hold their
Mm-hmm.
hand while we go out together and do it together because they really want to get the ball. Okay, I'll come out with you. Like, and that's when they want to start picking that stuff up. But for us to put it on them because we expect that they should be able to do it, hmm, that really just gets in the way of our
Mm-hmm.
connection and our relationship because then we've set up that expectation, we put it on them, and now we're going to be mad if it doesn't work out, like no matter what it is, right?
Exactly. Well, and
So we
you said,
don't need the rule for it, right?
mm-hmm. Well, and you even said too, like our kids don't want to be hurt either, but they also want, as humans, to have that the understanding of the various ways different environments operate. And the narrating
Yeah.
piece is so fascinating and so important because I've talked to multiple different people, and one of them was my former psychology professor when I was in college, and she does a lot of research and study on children's memory. And part of what she said is so important to help our kids solidify their memories and kind of create that story narrative of their life and their family is to do that, to have a narration of their family vacation and have a chat about it and talk. And that's so important because humans do that. We talk in story, we have communication, and that's what makes us so unique is that we do have that opportunity to talk back and forth and allow our kids to ask questions or even ask a question ourselves that possibly our kids can answer. Oh, I took a break before I crossed the road. Did you notice that? Things like that. I mean, that's part of that narrating too, just to alert them or bring their awareness forward, maybe. And of course that could be child dependent because we all know our kids and what they're capable of, I believe. And so I do think that's such an important part is that narrating.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that is so helpful no matter their age. Like it's something we continue to do as they get older because they can't read our minds. They don't see the things that we're thinking about. And absolutely, it's independent, like it's dependent on the child and what they're interested in hearing. So maybe it's just a sentence, maybe it's a couple of words, maybe it turns into a 10-minute conversation, a 30-minute
Hmm.
conversation. That's the lovely thing, we have the time for things to unfold. This is, it's not, oh my gosh, here's a learning moment, I need to jump on it. No, moments will bubble up, and when they bubble up with our child, when they are, brought up by our child, or we're narrating, brought up as in they keep asking questions or they're
Yeah.
curious about this. That is when it is going to connect for them. That's when the story is really deeply making sense to them and is just firing on all cylinders in their mind. Because, even just how we process things, how we make choices. That was one of the things that was so interesting to me and completely new, as in I did not think about it, but my kids growing up took a lot of processing time, a lot of quiet time, a lot of what looked like, quote, doing nothing time, whether it's walks in the forest or swinging on the swing or just sitting on the couch listening to music. You know, there was so much more processing that they were doing when they had the time and the space to do it.
Mm.
So, I mean, the learning that was happening there, the deeper understanding of themselves, so much more self-awareness, so much more time to think about, oh, I'm having an argument with my friend. I wonder, why that is happening right now, or what might I say, or, all those different pieces of thinking, or maybe it's about their interest. And then us narrating and sharing just little bits that are going on for us. They can be like, oh, because sometimes from the outside we can look like, oh, we're the adult, we know all the things, because that's the message that they're hearing all around them, right? When they're
Mm-hmm.
they're maybe in their music, certainly in some of the TV shows and on YouTube, like, adults have this power, adults have all the answers, like that's kind of the conventional message. Yet for them to see us making choices, for them to hear us saying, oh, sorry, I'm sorry that I did that or did it that way, and you would like it this other way. Yeah, we can do that. Seeing me change my mind,
Yeah.
seeing the processing that I do as a human being just helps them also feel like a normal human being when it's hard to make a decision, or they try something and it goes sideways. Like, that happens to everybody. It's not just a kid thing. So there is just so much value in narrating things along the way to whatever level that they're interested in at the moment, because we have
Mm-hmm.
time for that. It doesn't have to all be done before they're 18 either, Like you
Yes.
said, we have tons of conversations with them at all ages. That is the wonderful thing about developing strong and connected relationships with them. The relationships don't change even as they get older, even as they move out. Like, all those pieces are still there, and you still have chances for conversations. Things still go sideways as adults. you
Mm-hmm.
know it really is such a beautiful foundation for, and for for how we want to be as a human being in the world, like even changing our minds. Whereas, so often the message is, oh, you've committed to this path and you must follow through and, get to the end. And, questioning that and changing paths is often looked down upon. Yet
Mm-hmm.
we can validate for them. They can see, like, I was sending my kids to school and then I wasn't. That was a big change. We
Yeah.
can make big changes in our lives, and it's okay. And it might be super awesome in the end.
Yeah. Well, and I like the part about the amount of time that kids do things that maybe from the outside are looking in, they're doing nothing. Because
Hmm.
again, it goes back to that school lens where the, it, we've been told, or the story goes, that kids will do learning in a certain way. And it'll be look like blocks of time that they spend doing a certain thing. And then they move to the next and the next and the next. Or if they're not doing that learning, that they are doing nothing, that they're wasting time, or they're sitting around idly. And I mean, as an adult, oh my goodness, my idle time from someone looking in is when my mind is the busiest. Or
Right.
it might not be actively busy, as in like I'm actively trying to figure a problem out, but it is a matter of it is working in some way. And then all of a sudden this idea will pop into my head and I'll go, oh my gosh, that's it. That's what I need to do. Or that's how I'm going to solve that. Or these are the connections that have been made now. So that even though you can't, test it or see it, doesn't mean the learning's not happening. And it's so unique and it's so individualized. There's just no way any of us can plan out what a child needs to learn in order to get to the next step, because it's so specific to them, and we have no idea how their brain's making those connections. And that's why that communication, I feel like, is so vital, because we get to hear their thought process, we get to hear what they're interpreting, we get to hear how they're seeing a particular situation or experiencing the world. And a lot of that has to happen because we have to be quiet. We have to give them space to
Right.
have that time to do the thing.
I know. And that goes back to the timetable thing too. It's like, okay, I know I need to give them some space and time to, like, look like they're doing nothing. And then when's that going to be over? Like, how long is long enough? And it's that just delicious miasma of creativity. I think where so often new things get connected. Things get, or existing things get connected in new ways, where it's like, oh, that's what I want to do next with that thing. But you can't put a timetable on that. And yes, we are surrounded by messages of productivity and having things to show. And, and again, the narrative of urgency. We need to do these things quickly or we're not good at it, or,
Mm,
we're a failure. Like all those messages that we've absorbed around urgency, around speed, around timetables, and just being productive. I mean, they're just fascinating. And when you start to question them and you just start watching, like for me, again, back to my guides being my children, I could see these things happening with my kids, giving, like, it was easier for me to give space and time to them than it was for me to give it to myself. So I could see it happening with them. And it was only then that I became more confident and like curious about, oh, like, what if I didn't put that pressure on myself as well? What if I
mm,
didn't keep telling myself, oh, you idiot, you didn't get that done. You had all this stuff today and you didn't tick off all the things on the list. The messages that and the way we talk to ourselves is very curious to look at. But
mm,
oftentimes they're just so second nature to us. We don't even realize, we think it's our inner voice, yet it really isn't. It's outer voices that we've absorbed and that we're just regurgitating to ourselves. So whatever kind of thing we can use to remind us, hey, you can question that. And for me, it was watching my kids, because once I took that pressure of timetable and productivity off them and gave them the space, oh my goodness, it
mm,
was amazing. Like the things that they were productive, the things that they were doing, whether or not it was ideas or things they were literally putting together, etc. Like you could see the value. It's like, oh, this is valuable. It's more valuable than ticking off those boxes. Once I could really see that for a human being, look how it can flow. Look what it can become. And if I don't put these, conventional framework of judging things on top of it, and then when I gave myself the space for that, it's just so fascinating. And again, it's not something you can do once and you're done, right? This messages,
yeah, no, this is a
they
continual
come back. They
process.
come exactly. This is not a journey that's ever finished, literally. Like that's it. The last stage is the flow of our unschooling lives. Like we
Hmm.
are living this lifestyle, and these questions and things are going to come up. You're going to have new questions as your kids hit different ages. As they all of a sudden a new interest comes up, it's like, ooh, I'm a little bit uncomfortable with that interest. There will always in life be challenges and things that come up, but it's okay. And that's part of learning and growing and continuing our self-awareness, right? Learning more about ourselves, learning more about the people that we live with. It's a lifestyle. It's not a, oh, I'm going to take this journey and then I'm all done and things are perfect.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, the fact that you have three kids, I think some people listening who have multiple children run up against a mixture of challenging situations and things where decisions need to be made on the fly or immediately. And, there's a concern possibly with sibling quote unquote rivalry. How one thing I wanted to highlight that it was part of your story in your book was the stage 7, where we already talked about shifting from control to connection, but this was the section where it was moving away from parents versus children, and there were several truths that you wrote about. The truth one was parenting is not adults versus children, and I love how you said that struggle happens when parents insist and children resist. And this idea that the struggle really is a choice, it's a decision. So when you're insisting something and the other one's resisting, if you keep going, then you're actively choosing to be within that struggle. And that goes right back to that stop, take a breath, take a beat, be curious, be open. And it's okay to even use that language, I think, with our kids to say, I see that we're in a struggle right now, depending on our age for kids and things like that. But we're in a struggle right now, and I feel like we each, or I need to be open and curious and step back for a minute. So as a parent of multiple kids, um, what would you say is some practical advice for people if they find themselves feeling a bit overwhelmed, or like they're not necessarily doing in their mind what they need to do for each of their kids, or if their kids have even said to them, I'm bored, or I don't like what we're doing, or this is not working for me? Like, what's some practical advice you could offer to parents in that situation?
Well, for me, those are like little challenges that come up along the way. And it's for me, it was so much more about having the conversations versus
Mm-hmm.
the judgment. Like if my child seems to be saying, I'm bored, I want something different for a while, like I can at first take that as a personal failure, right? Like, oh my
Mm-hmm.
gosh, I'm failing to provide things that grab their attention, that keep them interested and learning and all those pieces. And, a lot of us are going to have that first initial reaction. But as you said, shifting to that open and curious space to learn more about it. Like at first, our reaction may well be, well, oh, you like to do this thing, or how about this thing? And I think this thing is really cool. I think you'll really like this thing. And we'll give a whole bunch of ideas, right?
Mm-hmm.
And depending on what's behind the I'm bored comment, that may help. It's like they were just looking for something else to do. They couldn't think of anything, and you help them and on their way. That's really not going to be a challenge that sits with us for too long.
Mm-hmm.
We can just help them and on they move. But often when it gets that next, oh, but they don't want to do that. They don't want to do anything I suggest, right? So it's like, okay, let's get curious about that. Let's learn a little bit more. Let's think a little bit bigger picture. So maybe we look at, so what has been catching their interest before now? What and maybe it's a game they were into, maybe it was a certain activity that they really loved, and now they're just kind of pulling back from that. And really interesting to just maybe have some conversation. Oh, why is that not catching your attention anymore? What did you used to love about doing that thing? Maybe we can find a similar kind of um, piece in another activity, right? So if it was an art thing that they love, maybe a different medium. Or if it
Mm-hmm.
was a game that they love, maybe it's a different kind of game in that same genre. You know, these are all the different stages and the different things that we can explore, because then there's yet another bigger picture that we kind of like, in the community and just online over the last 20 odd years. It can often be a stage, when our kids are transitioning, as we spoke about earlier, maybe from transitioning into the preteens. They're kind of playing with the kind of person that they want to be. The stuff that used to interest them as a child just isn't catching their attention anymore, yet they haven't found something new for
Mm.
themselves. So to be able to like acknowledge that with them, maybe it's in our narration piece, maybe sharing a story where, yeah, there is kind of this in between time, um, and mentioning that, maybe they want some reassurance that, yes, something will come up, but also the reassurance that it's okay to be here. Maybe let's just cocoon for a while. Is there a favorite show or movie that they want to watch? Do they want to just listen to some audiobooks for a while? Is there a way to just sit with that discomfort in a way that is supportive of them. Like, not,
Mhm.
oh my gosh, we need to solve this problem as soon as possible, right? Because then when they try a new thing and it doesn't catch their attention, that feels like a failure, rather than a reaching out. You can just kind of see where the energy is coming from, right? If it's coming from them and they're reaching out and they try something and it doesn't work, that is okay. That's part of the learning. They've learned something new about themselves. Like, ah, okay, that didn't quite work. I thought it was going to work because I kind of like this. What's another way I might get this? Maybe they want to talk about it. Maybe some kids aren't a verbal processors, right? They're more of an internal kind of processor, and maybe they're just sitting kind of doing nothing, and you're like, oh, can I bring you a snack? You're like being okay, and in fact being supportive of this stage, of this in between time. And that will help them to not feel so bad about it, not feel like something's wrong with them because they're feeling this in between stage. And if you can, like, so if they're not a big verbal processor, maybe it's like, oh, I want to try this, is the first thing you hear, right? And then it's like, okay, like, try it. Don't question them. Don't make them explain to you why they're sure they're going to like this thing or anything. They just want to try it and see and gain a little bit more experience. Like, so there can be so many levels to something that comes up. And like you were talking earlier, with 3 kids, that will happen at different times mostly for them. And that is one interesting thing that I found when we have, like, with multiple kids. It's like, okay, I need to be fair. I need to be spending the same amount of time with each of them. I need to be doing the same kind of thing with each of them. But no, when you dive into it, and you want to look through that kind of fairness lens, more what's fair is helping them out in the way they need your support and help right now. So, maybe an older child is just really into the thing that they're enjoying, and you just want to keep supplying them that thing, make sure they're fed, be there for conversations, but it doesn't physically take up a lot of your time. But maybe another younger child is going through this phase where they're transitioning between things and they need lots of uh, supportive processing time, or they just need to see your confidence and love in them and your sureness that this is completely normal and it's okay, and you're there for them any way that they need. That takes up maybe more of our energy, maybe a bit more of our thinking, maybe more of our physical being with them, and that changes over time with all of them. And so, I mean, that's kind of what I would suggest is meeting the child, who they
Mhm.
are and what their needs are in the moment, regardless of the others. And then there are seasons where they're all needing a lot from you, and those are more tiring. But then you can also remind yourself that it's a season. You can
Yes.
also be narrating that I'm feeling really overwhelmed. I need some extra sleep tonight. It doesn't mean martyring ourselves, but it also can mean choosing to step out of my comfort zone and be tired for a while because I feel this is something important that I want to do. And all of those answers are okay, but coming back to realizing that it's our choice and this is the kind of relationship we want to have, that for me, that's kind of where it lies.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh, yes. No, there were so many good nuggets in there, and I'm glad you brought up the fair doesn't mean equal. That was a truth 3 in your book, and that I
Yeah.
actually highlighted that because somebody who worked in the special education world when I worked in the public schools and the private schools, the private school I worked in, that was a piece of their sort of motto that they talked to the parents about, and the grandparents were invited, and I love that because they really emphasize this idea of individualized education. And that's the truth with all of our relationships. If we went around constantly saying to ourselves with our children, okay, everything has to be equal, we would be a mess. Everybody would be,
Mhm.
it would just be so tense and so stressful because you're constantly measuring without really,
Yes.
like you said, looking at the child in front of you. Because if I went to my daughter with what my son might require, she might look at me like I'm crazy. Like, why are you giving me this? I don't want that. you know? And I think that's
Yeah.
the physical part of that, the emotional part of that, the actual activities, what my son likes to do is going to be completely, in some ways, different than what my daughter. there's the whole idea of love languages. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but there's
Hmm.
that piece of it when it comes to what makes our children feel loved, and they can be very different. Some may love words of affirmation, some may love, you know your time, some may really appreciate it when you do things for them, like service, and some may love physical touch. So you just have to know your kids and let go of this idea of, if I don't do this for every single one of them, then I'm going to somehow fail them. And I just think that's such
Yes.
a good point to highlight, because it also lets you off the hook a little bit. I think it makes, when I have learned and read and tried to understand my role, and also this journey that I'm on as well. Anytime something resonates with me that makes me feel like I just had a little bit of a weight left off my shoulders, it just feels it's like, okay, good. So this part is really important, I think, for families to take in and embrace, because it does really speak to looking at the kids in front of you and not assuming that you understand everything, and that you know everything, and that you have to have it all figured out right now. Like, it's a process, and it's an ebb and flow, and it's a journey. It literally is a journey.
It is. And what you talked about with the weight, that's just, I mean, it's phenomenal. It's exactly it. Like when you realize that, oh, I don't have to have all the answers. If we're having a challenge, I don't need to figure out the quote right way to solve it and then tell everybody else. We can all just work together. Like I can bring my information to the table, or my perspective, what I'm seeing, but also be open and curious to hear what other people are saying. So many times, and I suspect this is your experience too, Missy, when we bring something to our kids, oh my gosh, their solution or their new creative ideas for a way to move through something are spectacular, and also something I never would have thought of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And especially
Yeah.
when it's about them. It goes back to, how are you really going to know exactly what's happening inside another person's mind? And even the idea of kids being in the same family, and how they can be vastly different because they are experiencing their families very differently. The first child has a very different family unit than the second child, and that family unit looks different than when the third child comes on. And so it's this, well, I guess what I'm trying to say is, like,
Yeah.
the template of open and curious. We're going to go back to that again, and connection over control. And um and I also love what you said. I'm gonna quote this from you, in your book. It says, "It's worth the effort to figure out what happened and get back on the path. It's living and learning and growing. I mentioned this is hard, right?" And that's in
Yeah.
relation to the idea of people feeling like they're doing it wrong, and they have to jump off the path. They have to abort everything and run back to what they left, because they felt like, maybe, oh, I just need to go back to what I left, because that's what people know and what I'm familiar with. And obviously I'm doing it wrong because it's hard.
I know sometimes, like, so as we were talking about many of these, you're going through a challenge with your kids, and it can be like, oh, if and if you take that out, we were talking about cocooning way back at the beginning, and if you take that out to like maybe extended family or friends with a more conventional mindset, the minute you mention that there's a challenge, it's like, well, send them to school.
Mm,
Because that is the thing that looks most different about you. So if that's hard, then put them back in school, and then we can at least all share the same common problems, because they're not all walking around like, "Oh, life is great, life is wonderful, this is beautiful." No, everybody has challenges. So it is fascinating to think of it that way. And that's the one thing I wanted to emphasize in the book. It's totally normal. Like these challenges are going to come up, and it's hard to work through them. It can take a lot of thought and energy and self awareness, and we're growing as a person. It is worth it, right?
hmm
It is worth that energy, no matter what situation. Like if you're a single person, like challenges come up, processing through them and working through them and learning more about yourself, and choosing another path and tweaking things. Like this is about being human beings in the world. And with this unschooling lifestyle, that's what we're helping with our child, right? To gain experience with this, to gain experience with making choices, with things going sideways, learning more about themselves, learning the things that, maybe environments that they're not very comfortable in, finding environments that they can enjoy learning more in, that they just
Mm-hmm.
enjoy navigating and engaging in. Like, we're just trying to help them gain experience with being a human being in the world. Like, things don't change just because, they hit age 18. It doesn't look different from one to the next. My lifestyle doesn't look different. Like, it shifted
Mm-hmm.
as we came, but as I was unschooling my kids, once we, kind of moved through that deschooling phase, my life looked very similar to their life, right?
Mm.
We were doing the things, we were following our interests, we had some things we wanted to do that we needed to do. Those were incorporated into our days. We had times that we needed to go out places, that was incorporated into our days. Like, we were all just human beings living together,
Mm-hmm.
really, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I also like the fact that you're talking about the discomfort because sometimes people may just gloss over that part and
Hmm.
not really give credence to it, and because they feel like if they talk about the discomfort, then they are going to be met with this challenge of, well, then just stop doing it. But that's
Yeah.
not life. We don't just stop just because it's challenging. We recognize that, okay, we've hit a hurdle. How are we going to jump over it? How are we going to go around it? Are we going to go under it? Like, what are we going to do? So now we see it, and to not run away from discomfort, because that teaches our kids to not want to ever have those challenges, and that sends a wrong message, I think, to, okay, you feel uncomfortable, so run away from it as fast as you can. Instead, let's
Mm.
come back and go, okay, well, what about this particular thing does make you feel uneasy? And there's there's nothing to say that you have to be within this discomfort or unease for X number of hours. It's just, you've noticed it now, you've recognized it. So what are we going to do differently? And if anything, I know for myself, and I have witnessed it with my kids, some of their discomfort has been some of their biggest teachers, where they've noticed, wow, I will never do that again. Or that is definitely not a job I want. Or, and so it's like, how amazing it is that if you have that lens of everything is it the everything goes into the bucket of learning, and then you
Yes.
just take out of it what you need for that next part.
Yeah, one of the big aha moments for me, and it's from stage 8, accepting the value of all experiences.
Hmm.
For me, I wrote, and then it hits us. Life isn't about trying to avoid the quote bad moments so we can finally live our quote good lives. We've been living our full lives all along. Because, as you said, these moments, these times of discomfort, this experience of challenges and finding a way to move through challenges, we learned so much. Like, even, you know, bad things can happen in our lives completely out of our control, yet we
Hmm.
still get to choose how we respond to them, right? How
Yes.
we process them, what we take away from them, the time that we chose to just power through that. And then like, there's no wrong choices. With every choice to move through things, we learn more about, well, how did that work for us? Do I feel good about that choice? If I kind of feel uncomfortable with some of it, like, why? What could I do differently next time? Like, we are
Hmm.
always learning through all these moments, and those are all part of our lives. It's because I remember that, oh, if I could just figure out this unschooling thing, then, the kids would always be happy. We know, things wouldn't go wrong. We get to choose our thing. What can go wrong when we get to choose what we do? But oh my gosh, holding out that carrot of, oh, here's your good life down there, when you
Yeah.
figure everything out, the
Right.
realization that, oh, life is all of it. When I look at those moments of discomfort, like you said, there can be so much growth in there. But
Hmm.
it's not about expecting there to be or insisting that there is. But when you are present in the moment, when you're, not trying to ignore it, but you're thinking it through, even if you do it after, depending how long the experience is, you figure stuff out. Even if it's like, ooh, yeah, that went good enough for me. I'm going to do the same thing next time something similar like that happens. That's more learning too, right? It's like, ooh, yeah, that went okay.
Hmm.
We don't have to be changing to be learning. It could be
Yeah.
the experience that, you know what, we got through that pretty well. And the thing is, when we're talking about focusing on the relationships and the value of that for learning, the value of that too for moving through challenging times, for moving through emergencies, like there's a trust built up there in the relationship that even when things go super sideways or something, urgent happens, there is that trust and connection that we can draw on, right? That so
Hmm.
maybe it means we manage to have that uncomfortable conversation with our
Yeah.
partner or our child, or they trust us enough to like, oh man, I really screwed up. Here's the thing, and they want to process it with you and they want to talk it through, something that already happened. That is so valuable just for human beings to, it's like, oh yeah, look how that went. And then you can talk about, oh, maybe you're talking about ways so that they don't find themselves in that situation again. Or maybe
Hmm.
you're also talking about ways that if they find themselves in that situation, what else could they do? Like all those different pieces can come up. But if the relationship isn't strong and trusting and respectful before then, there's so much more chance that when things go sideways, it's going to be more headbutting than it
Hmm.
is helpful. You know what I mean?
Definitely. I call it creating the container, where we create that
Ah,
container
yeah.
and all those interactions and all those experiences when they're younger, and they build and build and build. And then they have that emotional safety net of that family or those people they can depend on. And they just know that they're trustworthy and that they know they can go to them
Hmm.
for anything. And that's so valuable. And yeah, I just can't overstate that enough
Yeah,
and how important that
exactly.
is.
Yeah,
Well,
again, it's not about judging good or bad, right?
hmm
It's
yeah.
it's having that safety net when life happens, because life happens.
No, it will for sure. I think we all can relate to that. Um, well, I mean, I could keep going because there's so many other parts of the book that we haven't even gotten to yet. So I'm just going to say to everybody, they need to just get it. It is this beautiful, wonderful book, The Unschooling Journey, a field guide. And Pam, before we wrap up, are there any parting words or words of advice for parents either new to this journey or maybe who are on it and maybe feel stuck right now? They're on that section of the journey where things feel big and hard to overcome.
Yeah, whether you're new on the journey or whether you're feeling stuck, I mean, for me, it really was reminding myself to embrace that beginner's mind, right? Realizing that, okay, there is more going on here. If I'm stuck, there's something that I'm missing, whether it's a piece about my understanding, whether it's a piece of the choices of the people that are also involved in it, or whatever. When I can make that shift to being open and curious, it's like, I'm stuck. I need more information. I don't know where to go from here. um, that I think is just a really helpful thing to be able, even if you're just curious with yourself and you're asking yourself more questions, like why is always a big question for me. Like, why do I think that?
Mm-hmm.
Where is that coming from? Why is that coming up for me now? Like, and you know, what if I thought this was really cool? Because so often something comes up that's uncomfortable for me, and I'm feeling stuck for someone else is wanting it. It's like, oh, what if I was a person that really loved that thing? What would I do? How would I see things? Who would I be? Just to be able to play around with that in my mind is really helpful. So yeah, to be open and curious when you're newer at unschooling, so it's maybe more focused on just learning about unschooling and understanding it, and being with your kids and looking to your kids to see how it's unfolding. And then,
Mm-hmm.
same if you've been doing it for years and something's come up and you're feeling stuck, again, get open and curious about it. How else can I look at it? look to my kids again and see what they're up to and see what they're doing. It's like, oh yeah, this is why we chose unschooling. And maybe if it's something to do with an interest they're having, or an environment that they're in, or something, I learn more by looking to them again. So either way, being open and curious is a really, really helpful tool, I think.
No, I agree. And it's funny too when you were saying that. I was like, we're real good at asking other people why, but we are not so great at asking ourselves.
Yes,
So, let me.
absolutely.
So tell us where can people find you, and also will you talk to us a little bit about your community you've created?
Sure, sure. My website is livingjoyfully.ca. I do have, if you sign up there, I have a free book, What is Unschooling, or you can find it free on any of the retailers. I have two podcasts now. The Exploring Unschooling podcast has more than 300 episodes in the archive if you're curious to learn more about unschooling. And last fall, Anna Brown and I started the Living Joyfully podcast, which is focused on exploring relationships. So we're having a lot of fun with
Nice.
that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And the community, that's called the Living Joyfully Network. I also host that with Anna. We have monthly themes there through which we explore unschooling. So, which is to say, basically, life through the lens of unschooling, because everything comes up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have weekly Zoom calls where we meet up with members to talk about their questions and challenges and share updates and aha moments. We basically kind of just discuss whatever's on anyone's mind. And they're recorded for those who can't make it. We change up the time for different time zones because we've got members from all over the world. And it's really just a group of people walking this journey together.
Mm.
We have members with kids who are not school age yet, who are considering this path. We have members with adult unschooled kids. Like, we have a vast range of unschooling experience, but there's also a vast range of life experience. And it just brings such a beautiful richness to the conversations. And everybody is just open and curious and trying to figure things out. And um, are bringing their questions at any time, and just like curious to hear how other people are seeing things, because when you're maybe having a challenge, so often we kind of get tunnel vision and fixated on it, right? So the
Mm-hmm.
act of kind of writing it out can start knocking things loose, and other people can sometimes, or often, see other pieces that we're just too close to notice. So getting
Right.
some feedback that way just starts knocking things around and bubbling new things up and new ways to look at things. It's not at all about telling anybody what to do. Like, when you join, we really say, we're not here for advice, but people share their experiences, and you can take in those experiences and see if they make sense to you, see if they give you a new idea, see how they relate to your children and your family, or how might you tweak them in a way that works better for the individuals in your family. So anyway, yeah, I love being part of it. It reminds me um, of the choices I'm making as a lifestyle for me too, and it's just inspiring every day to pop in there.
I imagine so. I know how many times when I've joined a group or had a chat with people, especially with families who are on the earlier side of things, I leave feeling refreshed and renewed again. It's almost like I'm going to unschool harder. Now, it's like I'm going to go at this with a new sense of, I just feel refreshed and like a
Yes,
reminder
and
of why
energy.
it is. It's great. It's wonderful. So I love that you are doing that. Um, so thank you so much again for spending some time with me and talking about this beautiful book. And I'm just grateful that I get to know you, and that you have been a part of my mind and part of my journey as a mom and an unschooling mom for all these years.
Thank you so much, Missy. I had so much fun chatting with you about the journey. I love it. It's inspiring to me. I'm coming away from this conversation with that nice new refreshed energy. So thank you so very much.
Thank you for listening. I hope our conversation has inspired you to answer your own call to adventure, whether that is traveling, changing jobs, cities, schools, or diving into unschooling. Whatever adventure you choose, know we are cheering you on. As always, stay curious, stay connected, and stay aware. Until next time.